It's been a couple of weeks since we last checked in with a mock draft over at the Draft Network, and TDN scout Joe Marino recently posted his fourth mock draft of the 2022 draft season, and I figured now would be a great time to mock the mock. Marino is one of my favorite draft analysts in the industry, and it's not just because he was one of the few guys who really loved Darnell Mooney, Chicago Bears wide receiver, more than most. It's because his mock drafts tend to always be pretty darn accurate. So when Marino posts a new mock, I recommend all you draft fans to make sure you circle it and give it a good read, because it is almost like reading a crystal ball. And in his latest mock draft, I think he's on to something. And what do I mean by that? The first 4 picks Marino has coming off the board in his latest mock are all on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that's what we're going to see play out once next April rolls around. And the really cool thing about this latest mock draft, number 4.0, is there's a new first overall pick. And that's Michigan edge defender Aiden Hutchinson, who was all the talk of the college football world with his dominant performance against Ohio State in their huge rivalry game. And his ascent kind of knocks Oregon's Kayvon Thibodeau down to number 2 overall. In this case, Hutchinson goes number 1 to the Detroit Lions. Thibodeau goes number 2 to the Houston Texans. And it's really kind of pick your flavor, right? Hutchinson's a little bit more of that power, strong, classic edge defender who is good against the run, good against the pass. He might not have as high of a ceiling as a pass rusher as Thibodeau at this point, but in terms of an every down defensive force, Hutchinson is trending in that direction. He's an experienced player, and if you watch his tape, you can't come away but feel like this guy is really going to challenge for that number 1 pick, and at the very least, he's coming off the board in the top 3. So Marino moving him up to number 1 in this next year's draft is a reasonable ascent for a guy who, if you keep checking around the draft landscape, a lot of the respected draft analysts, whether it's Dane Brugler over at The Athletic or some other outlets, they have Hutchinson kind of moving into that same rarefied air that Marino has in 4.0. So it almost feels like as the college football season is coming to an official close here, Hutchinson is the pace setter, and it's going to be his pick to lose over the next few months. And a guy like him, with his workout regimen and his ability to just impress, not only on the field with a helmet and shoulder pads on, but when he gets in a t-shirt and shorts, he's going to be an impressive specimen. I can't see him losing any ground, and the only way he'll get jumped by Thibodeau between now and next April is, the combine and pro days, those events with that speed and twitch and just absolute juice that Thibodeau's going to bring to the table. It could make a team like the Lions say, you know what? They're both equally qualified pass rushers to project as 10-plus sack guys in the NFL, but Thibodeau's ceiling might be a little higher. It's going to be a really fun back and forth to watch play out over the next few months. And if you look at the mock drafts over at the Draft Network, you're already seeing that happen. Marino has moved Hutchinson into his top spot. You're probably going to see a lot of the other draft analysts following suit on TDN. I guarantee you between now and April, it's going to move back and forth, though, and we'll see where it ultimately settles. But the really cool thing about Marino's mock is that pick 3 and 4, he moves to the other side of the defense. Well, when I say the other side, the third level of the defense in the secondary. The third pick is Kyle Hamilton, one of my favorite players in this draft, who I think is a rare safety prospect, so rare that he could end up challenging for the number 1 pick overall by the time we get through the combine and the pro day circuit. He's that kind of a defensive eraser, and to go 3rd overall, even if this is his highest resting spot, right, where he ends up being the 3rd pick, doesn't jump Thibodeau or Hutchinson to get into the top 2, a 3rd overall pick as a safety is such a unique dude. It never happens. I mean, it's happened, but it rarely happens in the history of the NFL draft that a player at a position that has somewhat been maybe undervalued can go that high in the first round. We're seeing in today's game, the safety position has become more of this hybrid, a guy who you want to be able to be on the field and erase an offense's passing attack like Hamilton's capable of doing, but at the same time not sacrifice your defense's ability to play against the run. Hamilton's that guy. I mean, he's the kind of player who, in my opinion, 3-4 years into his career, could be in that defensive MVP type conversation, defensive player of the year conversation. And if you know you're going to get a player like that, is there really a pick that's too high for him? So I think that top 3 that Marino has in mock draft 4.0 over on the Draft Network, Hutchinson, Thibodeau, Hamilton, you're going to see them kind of jockeying. Hamilton's a distant third right now, but I think he'll close the gap as we go through the traditional draft season. At number 4, you have Derek Stingley going to the Jets, the cornerback from LSU, who's kind of living off a reputation. When he was a 19-year-old freshman, had a sensational year. Hasn't really been the same guy since. And with cornerbacks, it's a very volatile pre-draft position. Cornerbacks, the slotting at the beginning of the season compared to the middle of the season, and then when we get right up to draft weekend, you see guys, pass each other that you wouldn't necessarily think would have ended up, prospects that wouldn't have necessarily ended up at the top of that position group. So Stingley has been the leader in the clubhouse at the cornerback spot since the 2021 college football season kicked off. He hasn't lost any ground, at least not yet, but I think you're starting to see some confidence in his game waver, and I'm not sure he'll end up this high, although you can't fault Marino for sticking him in the top 5, because once you get past Stingley, the upside, that lure or the lust for the upside guy, there's a lot more. There's some safer picks, but the NFL draft, when you're picking in the top 5, you want to hit the grand slam home run. Stingley is the kind of guy that can be that grand slam home run, assuming you're getting the freshman year version of him and not what we've kind of seen since then from the LSU star. You have offensive linemen coming off the board at 5 and 6, which is, again, notice a trend here. 2 offensive tackles following 2 defensive backs who followed 2 defensive edge defenders. No quarterbacks. The NFL draft is more fun when we have quarterbacks. And if you guys have watched this video series of Mock the Mock on the Draft Network's YouTube channel, you know I like kind of zeroing in on where the first quarterback comes off the board, because that's usually the biggest domino, the biggest chip in the first round is that guy, that quarterback. It's great when we have quarterbacks who go 1, 2, and 3, or 3, 4, and 5. That makes those picks so much more valuable, not only for the teams that have them, but for the teams searching for a quarterback, because maybe they can jump up and get that guy in the top 5. This year it doesn't look like we have that, and Marino keeps up with that trend in his mock by having his first quarterback that comes off the board at number 8 to the Washington football team, and it's Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati. It's an interesting choice by Marino, because while I do think Ridder has a nice profile as an NFL starting quarterback, I'm not sure he's more pro-ready than Kenny Pickett. I'm not sure he has the upside of a guy like Malik Willis, but I will say this with a disclaimer. I'm really going to start diving into Ridder's film with a lot more detail and depth to see exactly what it is a respected guy like Marino sees to make him a top 10 pick. Now, mind you, it doesn't mean that Joe necessarily thinks Ridder is a top 10 player in the draft. Mock drafts are not necessarily reflective of the author's ranking of prospects or the author's big board. It's more a predictive exercise of what you think is going to happen in the first round, not necessarily what you would do in the first round. So the fact that he has Desmond Ridder as the number 8 pick overall, it just might be here's the best quarterback at that moment for the Washington football team, who clearly need a quarterback. And while Marino might have a fringe first-round grade on Ridder, if a first-round grade at all, if it's his top quarterback in the draft, you can almost say, yeah, it's going to go top 15, top 20. And I think Ridder at 8 might be a little rich for my blood, but if we're kind of like picking at hairs here, right? If you have Ridder, who's maybe, would you feel better about him going 15th overall, 21st overall? What's the difference at that point? If he's a first-round quarterback and your team needs a quarterback like the Washington football team does, you go up and you get that quarterback. So I think what we learned from Marino's most recent mock is that the draft fans who love the draft because it kind of marries up some fantasy football elements too, right? We all love the rookie skill players, who's going to be the big running back, the big-time wide receiver, and obviously those quarterbacks. This is not going to be the draft class for you. This is more like a traditionalist's draft class. You're going to have interior players, you're going to have pass rushers, you're going to have offensive linemen, and yes, you'll get your skill guys later in the first round with some quality wide receivers. He has Chris Olave, for example, from Ohio State, coming off the board 13th overall to the Saints. Really nice pick there. Really nice value for New Orleans, a team that's going to need to kind of rebuild that wide receiver room. Why not go with the player that might be the best at that position in this year's draft? But you're not going to have that real sexy draft year with the quarterbacks leading the way, some big-time running backs, some big-time wide receivers. It's going to be all about the big uglies. So the football traditionalists are going to love this mock, They're going to love the 2022 NFL Draft class because of that. And of course, you're going to love all the content over at the Draft Network. So make sure you're checking out thedraftnetwork.com for all your latest mock drafts like Joe Marino's 4.0, which is live on the site now. There'll be another one coming out early next week. And head over to the Draft Network's Twitter account and make sure you subscribe to this channel for all the latest updates coming from the site. Follow me on Twitter at Bryan Perez NFL. And thanks for checking us out.